Item 7.05, 2023-2024 school year calendar. Dr. Bedell.
Madam Chair, the superintendent recommends approval of the 2023-2024 school year calendar as recommended by the calendar committee, and further recommends the board adopt the recommendation of the committee with regard to a consistent start date to the school year and to development of future calendars.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Ms. Ellis.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that I'm in line with the process here. This was presented to us previously,
Correct.
these two, so we can jump right in, right?
And I'm sorry, I didn't say earlier, but just a reminder, if we're going to do 2 rounds, do your questions first.
That's
and
my question.
Comments
Are-
after.
Are we
yeah.
going to have questions? Okay.
Yeah.
I have no questions.
Okay, so does anybody else have a question?
No, but I have motions as I submitted
Okay,
in advance.
Ms. Corkadell, do you have a question?
I do have a process question.
Okay.
So normally when we have more than one option that has been thoroughly vetted and reviewed, just like with redistricting and other things, we normally pair them out, or if we would have had multiple nominations, like when we have multiples
Right.
for officer requests, usually on the VP side, we present them and then the member simply states which one they want to vote for, and then if one does not, then we proceed. And that is a Robert's Rules process, and we've done it in the past successfully, and it allows for equal consideration of two processes to be presented, and then based on that, and so, but however, we do have amendments. So I just wondered what approach we're taking, because there's pros and cons to both, especially with amendments, because we have to have that particular calendar, or we could amend as a whole regardless of which one that we have to. But I just wanted some clarification on the process, because we've taken different approaches in different years on this. I've seen it go both ways, but I was just curious. With the argument, of course, being that if one is presented, the other one does not have its fair opportunity. And while we are still under our older motion, that is how we have, that is the why we have proceeded, because they were fairly considered at equal times. And so that would be, otherwise it's just the first person who gets to the button on the 2 choices. So that's all. I would like some, that's more of a point of information, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we have
on
we
process.
have amendments, I mean, we have motions
And we
that
have a
have been
second.
submitted, which I think in some cases apply to both. And I'm trying to remember what we did last year.
Well, we have a motion and a second on the floor.
Yeah.
And then we have a motion that we would need to dispose of in order to really evaluate both calendars.
Yeah.
We can't. Yes, we do. I moved. He recommended and I moved and she seconded. That's a
Okay,
motion.
but point of order, we haven't gone through questions yet. I honestly didn't hear that.
I'm sorry.
I'm not getting this.
The recommendation.
We're still on process, but I'm being told now we have a motion on the table?
Well, we had a recommendation from the superintendent, which,
Did
That
not
was the motion.
specify.
Yep,
right?
that was the motion and it was seconded.
and that we all, that was seconded.
Can I get what the motion is? I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I
I'm
missed
sorry.
that. So
Okay, sure.
I don't
Yeah.
understand why point of order, I don't understand why we're entertaining motions before we've gotten questions answered.
We're not entertaining a motion other than
His
the
recommendation that I said so
recommendation that the
moved. And
superintendent-
yes.
And my apologies, I missed what the recommendation
so-
is. That's
Like,
my-
I'm not understanding what the motion is on there because it was
Well,
not clarified.
Let's
That's all.
ask Dr. Bedell
Yeah.
to reread the recommendation.
All right. I think we've gone through the last 2 board meetings or so presenting
That's not a motion.
the calendar to the board,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Okay. So I know, and we talked about the 2 different options probably at I know for certain, the committee came with two different options.
Right.
A pre-Labor Day, a post-Labor Day option.
That was the board's request to bring two options.
Okay, I'm just making.
Committee
just-
did that and recommended the pre-Labor Day option.
Correct. I thought that was addressed in terms of that option prior to us bringing this recommendation here today. So I just want to make sure my recollection serves me correct. So then the recommendation that we put out was, based on those previous conversations, we recommend the approval of the 2023-2024 school year calendar as recommended by the calendar committee, and further recommends the board adopt the recommendations of the committee with regard to a consistent start date to the school year and to development of future calendars. And I think that gets into the discussion that will have to take place regarding this recommendation, if I'm not mistaken.
So is your recommendation then specifically for the pre-Labor Day? Because that
Yes,
is
yes,
what,
that's what
that
we-
was not, because I'm looking at two options and I didn't hear we recommend the A or the B. I'm just hearing the recommendations of that, and all of a sudden, we've got a motion, and normally we do questions before motions, so that's where my confusion is. I'm not trying to create a fury here. I would like to get an understanding of what was motioned,
So-
because it just happened so fast, and
So-
I'm fine with that, because now we've got a motion on the table. I am very disappointed, though, that we did not discuss how we were proceeding with them. But-
Well, let me suggest that
Whatever
we
we
take
need
a
to do.
brief recess and we discuss some of the process here so that we can get ourselves straight and come back in about 10 minutes. Is that okay?
As long as we're not all together, or do we
Right.
need to go to close? I would just suggest that the president receive advice
Yeah.
and such. Yeah, because I just want to make sure I know what I'm
Yep,
up against here.
okay? All right.
I'm not even.
Okay, we're back. So I think I would request that the motion maker withdraw the motion and we move forward with the staff presentation on this topic.
Sounds good.
Okay? So we can move forward.
So
Thank
good
you.
afternoon, President Tobin, Vice President Silkworth, members of the board, Dr. Bedell. Again, I'm Bob Mosier, Chief Communications Officer for the school system, here to present item 7.05, the 2023-2024 school year calendar, which is before the board for approval this afternoon. As you recall, we presented the recommendation of the calendar committee to you at your last meeting. We then posted that recommendation online, along with the second calendar that the committee presented, for public comment. That comment has been provided to this board and has been uploaded to our website so that the public can view it. By way of review, it's the policy of this board to have the calendar committee present you with its recommendations and the board's responsibility to adopt a final calendar. Also, by way of review, here are the 24 invitees to the calendar committee each year. As you can see, there is a diverse cross-section of parents, students, employee bargaining unit representatives, and representatives from key departments in our school system. Did I go too fast? I did go too fast, didn't I? There we go. Okay. The committee's recommended calendar, as presented to this board on November 16th, calls for classes to begin for students on Monday, August 28th, and conclude on Thursday, June 13th. The calendar contains the same breaks as exist in this year's calendar, and also includes the applicable holiday closings this board has approved. There are 3 days built in for inclement weather as required by state law, and 12 partial days, 4 unity days on which staff engage in professional development related to equity, and 2 early dismissal days at the end of each of the 4 marking periods. The calendar also contains the closings required by state law, which you see here. I mentioned the 12 partial days a minute ago, and this is one of 2 significant changes recommended by the committee. The calendar before you removes the 3 partial days designated for parent-teacher conferences, moving the total number of partial days from 15 contained in this year's calendar down to 12. As I said when I was before you in November, there was robust discussion about the inconvenience the number of these days pose for families and the increasing number of ways that parents and teachers can communicate the information shared at conferences. Additionally, the committee sought to address the need for more professional development for teachers, particularly in light of drastic increase this year in conditionally certificated teachers, by closing elementary and middle schools for students for a day. We can do this because, as the board may recall, elementary and middle school students go to school for 181 days, 1 more than required, and high school students attend on 180 days because we closed their schools on the day of their graduation. Staff identified the closing date for elementary and middle schools as November 1st. That's the day after Halloween, so trick-or-treaters, as I said before, can sleep in after a busy night. The committee also made 2 recommendations: to establish a consistent date on which to start the school year and to resume the year-ahead process where tentative calendars are put together more than a year in advance so families can begin to plan. As I said at the outset, this matter is before you for a vote today, and with that, we will be happy to try to answer any questions you have.
Okay, I still see Ms. Corkadell's light? Okay.
Yes, okay. I guess, I do have, could you please go over a typical half-day environment of the staff, from the staff's perspective? And
So
just sort
let
of
me
give us
ask
an
Mrs.
outline.
Jackson or
Because this
Dr.
is one of those places where we do hear, from our communities as well as from our staff about, and I think it would be helpful to explain what's happening in real time more
I
than
think Mrs.
just
Jackson and
on
Dr. McMahon are
calendar.
far more attuned to the schoolhouse operation than I am, so I think they can
Correct,
give you a
yeah.
better answer.
Good afternoon. For the record, Monique Jackson, Deputy Superintendent, Student and School Support.
Maureen McMahon, Deputy Superintendent, Academics and Strategic Initiatives.
Thank you, Ms. Corkadell, for the question. So could you reframe your question, because we have different types of 2-hour early dismissals. And so would you like us to go through all the types, or is there a specific type that you would like
So
us to address?
I think the ones that are occurring after after a marking period are self-evident. This is those opportunities for our staff to collaborate, get ready for the next one, tidy up whatever they need to with that. But our parents, we started this Unity Day program, and it was embraced by a lot in our community, continues to do so. But there is a lot of mystery of what happens in that 2-hour early dismissal and how it supports our education efforts of our students. So if you could just clarify too, because in some respects, although I understand it, hearing how it is framed out, I think would be important.
Absolutely, thank you. First and foremost, to help take some of the mystery out, I would encourage, we have a lot of our principals that do post on Twitter to show what some of the activities, professional development opportunities, things of that nature that their staff engages in. That being said, the three of us attend professional development that occurs on the Unity Days at schools just for that reason, so that we can continue to monitor at a central office level, as well as get our own professional development. Teachers engage in professional development delivered by not only their principal, but their colleagues. Frequently, the equity lead and the principal are side by side, giving the professional development. Sometimes students are involved, and it's really a day for teachers to engage in professional development. This year we are talking about leading with teaching with equity and the brain, and so there's a little bit of brain science. We are engaging in other activities to help people understand the data at their specific school level, and then continuing to plan instruction aligned with what they have learned. Dr. McMahon?
I would agree 100%. And the real excitement is we've seen growth over the years. We're now starting to see leadership, as Mrs. Jackson said, different people taking leadership in the buildings. And with that leadership, what you'll see is whole grade levels talking about what they're doing to meet student needs. And you'll also see cross-interdisciplinary linkages being made. And so we'll get, from my side of the house, we'll get more talk about the curriculum and how to make the curriculum come alive so that every student sees themselves in the curriculum and it matters differently to them. So it's been quite a journey, as well as any individual meeting time.
Right. And we talk about, this whole idea of culturally responsive teaching and the brain. And that's what we've been working on for the last 2 years. We have not planned for next school year yet. That will probably start happening in the winter. Now, I know our team has started that, but, as far as communication with our executive team and things of that nature. But as Mr. Silkworth will probably attest to, because I've attended North County professional development, when you're at a middle school, but more so at a high school level, most of your collaboration happens either at that particular grade level, but most of it happens at the department level. And so to see the World and Classical Language Department and the Math Department at the professional development really collaborate and talk and plan about students, right? Because that student could have Algebra 1 first period, but then they could go to Spanish on fourth period B day, right? And, they usually don't have that opportunity like we have at an elementary or a middle school. And so that's the other piece, is getting down to the student level. And to also talk about that incorporation of community and school. And so those are the types of things that occur during that 3-hour time period.
And then this is also meeting although we implemented this prior to some of the states' initiative, this is also now meeting our standards and guidance from the state and the federal level as to how to approach our requirements in the course of equity. Because equity is actually a requirement, not just
Right.
something we believe in, right?
Right, in alignment with our very own equity policy and regulations.
Yeah, and the
as well.
blueprint has some additional enhancements, and it sounds like we will be we're already meeting those standards. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. And so I don't know if Dr. Bedell has anything to
Okay.
add to what we've said, but
Okay.
that's what we see as a firsthand experience from our vantage point.
Yeah, I have a lot to add, but I'll just
Okay.
wait until all questions have been fielded, and then I can kind of offer my remarks.
Yes.
Ms. Schulheim?
I do have motions when appropriate.
Okay. I do not see other lights. Yeah, Dr. Bedell, did you have something you wanted to add, or?
Yeah, I think it's first and foremost just being here for whatever 100 and something days I've been here. You know, I continue to learn a lot about how people operate in this system, how people perceive how things are going. And when I kind of hear the word, I don't know if it was mystery, whatever it is, like what we're doing shouldn't be a mystery to any single board member, right? So if like there are concerns about what's happening with our equity training, then I think rather than getting it from secondary sources, I think we have a responsibility to say to you all, we'll work with you and allow for you to experience it for yourself. And then you can draw your own conclusion from a firsthand experience. But none of this should be a mystery. At least in my time working as a superintendent, I valued the equity work that we were doing, and even some of the pushback that we've gotten with equity work. My time in Baltimore County, there was pushback, not as much in Kansas City, but I think people wanted to know what was happening in the trainings. And so for me, I think it would be important that as we roll out these trainings, we work with you all to give you an opportunity to go to a session and see for yourself. I think it will also be welcomed by building principals to see that board members are willing to come in and understand what we're doing. And I think we can make that invitation so that none of this should be a mystery to anybody, what's happening. So that's one of my initial comments.
Okay, Dr. Bedell, thank you. Ms. Schulheim? do you want-
All right, I move, and this is relevant, and we'll all see why. I move to rescind the board's action taken on January 20th, 2021, quote, that all future calendars we evaluate the start date in the following manner. If Labor Day lands on September 5th or later, the school year would begin the preceding Monday. If Labor Day lands on or before September 4th, the school year would begin after Labor Day. So that's my first motion.
Okay,
Second.
all right. Ms. Frank?
Yes, so as we talk about stability and trying to allow parents to plan for vacations, plan for childcare, and all of the issues that they're going to come into, I know that that conversation is going to come up, and it certainly came up in the comments as we were looking at the calendar responses. It was our compromise at the time that this motion was passed to acknowledge that we were trying to find some common ground on start. And that common ground was, well, we understand that the majority of the people on the survey responses wanted a post-Labor Day start. However, it puts us so far out that maybe it's not feasible in some years when Labor Day starts so late. So the compromise was, well, if it starts really late, we will have the start of the year start before Labor Day. But if it's early enough, we will start after Labor Day per the requests of the community. So we have operated under that motion for the pre-Labor Day And now the year that we would finally go back to the post-Labor Day is the year that this motion arises to rescind that. And I find that troubling because the compromise has been reduced in that sense. There is no compromise now. It is all, well, we should have just done pre-Labor Day and been sort of upfront about it if that was the plan to move forward. So I would strongly disagree with this motion. We have given this this to the community to make their plans and to look at how they would like their calendar. We have agreed that that was their concerns and that we were going to be responsive to that. And I think that taking that from people is just not appropriate for a board to say in this time where it would finally go back to what some of the other folks who had weighed in on the calendar would want. So I will not be supporting this motion.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Dent?
Can I get a point of clarification? I thought the motion was to take so that we could have the flexibility of deciding pre and post independently versus like a statement that was made. It was my understanding that if Labor Day fell on, that it was kind of set, if you will. That if it fell on the 5th, that we would start prior. If it fell on the 4th, we would start after. And so in that case, in this year's calendar, Labor Day does fall on the 4th. So therefore, it would be an after. Is that accurate? Okay. And given the fact that last year, they got, educators got less than 6 weeks for the summer, which we're headed into that same situation this year if we follow our agreed upon motion and go post. We keep on getting the same results out of it. So if I understood the motion, it was to ensure that we are not locked into a time frame that is pre and post that doesn't give us the flexibility to be able to modify the calendar as a result of us making sure that we get the calendar correct. Now, I thought all this started as a result of Juneteenth becoming a holiday, and I could be wrong on that, but it seems like to me that each year, with the weather, with everything else, it seems like Juneteenth become the moment to where it causes the teachers to have to either go to stay longer or for us to end the calendar year and when summer begins and summer ends. At least that was the case last year. So I just need a clarification, the purpose of the motion, I guess.
The purpose of the motion as the motion maker, I'll address that if you don't mind, President Tyler, is to rescind the previous board's action. That is the only purpose. I have other motions that get into other things, as I've sent out to everyone well in advance and also called each and every single one of you about, so individually. So this just rescinds that previous motion. It does not address future calendars in any way. That'll be later. The only purpose of this motion is to rescind previous board action. But
Okay.
with regard to Juneteenth, those things happen 6 months apart.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ellis?
Thank you. I'll be honest, I'm a bit torn with the motion on the table because we did commit to that as a guide for developing our calendar, and when we keep hearing about lack of consistency, here we are going to change again what we told our school community that we're going to do. So that part has me troubled. And the record will show I did not vote in favor of the motion that now is being proposed to be rescinded. But it is a motion that this board passed. So this is troubling to me. And I always have to look at this through the lens of what is best for our students, what is best for our school families. And I'm struggling with this one because we also have in front of us, a calendar option that post Labor Day does go late into June. I'm opposed to that. I am in support of a more condensed school calendar, which our families have pretty consistently asked for, and we can't seem to get there. This is not any kind of criticism of our calendar committee. It's a criticism of all of the constraints that are put on us by the state and by this board, because we have built in so many additional days. So I don't mean to ramble, but I'm just troubled that every time we try to land in a place that our families can understand what we're doing and where we're going with this, we keep changing it. So I'm struggling with it. But I just had to share those thoughts before I vote, whatever I vote.
Thank you. Ms. Corkadell?
Yes, so I'm, for different reasons maybe, well, some of them similar to Member Ellis, this is a hard one. But here's where I'm coming from a little bit to explain where I'm probably going to land on this, is that we're already looking to dynamically change. Now, the change actually goes back to previous years, as Mr. Mosier had reported when this was introduced. Back in the day, we used to have multi-year calendars, and you always knew kind of where you were going to be. And then there has been, because things have changed in the addition and deletion of calendars, of course, that pre-post day conversation has gotten it left a lot of gray areas since we originally had started to work towards getting us to a better place in our process regarding the calendar. COVID obviously threw that for a little bit of a loop. And our original surveys, I do not know that accurately reflects where our community is currently. I would personally, but what I do know is that if we're dealing with multi-year calendars and then we're going into March again, perhaps we need to evaluate where our community is and have that conversation instead of staying into a canned formula. A consensus canned formula is great, provided it's still meeting the need. My personal interest in supporting the original motion that was adopted back in 2021 was seeing these last minute, all of a sudden, here's a suggestion coming in, and everybody's going like, where on earth did that come from? And then further that, if they do have that, do they even have a chance to have it addressed here on the dais and have the support to say to their fellow members, I've got an idea for a calendar. And the way some of that transacted internally, externally, and everywhere in between led me to believe that this was a good place to be. Upon reflection of where we are now and where we want to be, I'm almost thinking that in the spring would be the time for us to truly establish some substantive boundaries that are reflective of where our community is now. And so, although I recognize that my district, the diversity of my district, includes a preference to a post-Labor Day because of the industries and the families and how we work in South County especially, that I will always be leaning into that post-Labor Day because of that. But recognizing what happens on the back end now with the additions of holidays, with the changes of how we view spring breaks and some of our other things, I really do think that it would be more appropriate for us to do that. I would feel more comfortable, of course, supporting this motion if I could get some support for resurveying and with the community. We haven't actually reached out to our community in a while. And for a while, we were given a little bit of survey indigestion there to our constituents. Now, this may be a good moment as we prepare to do a multi-year calendar, to reassess where our community truly is now that they see as a reflection of this. Because honestly, we're going to have a motion on the table that will not place the post-labor and the pre-labor at an equal vote opportunity today. That I do not see that materializing. After the recess, that was not brought as an option. So as we move forward here, having that second calendar really isn't doing the folks that I represent that want the post-day Labor Day, because it will never come to vote, because once the other gets its 5. So it with our process not being fairly accountable to actually truly deliberating on both options, I don't see that this is actually solving a consensus problem. But I would like to see that survey come out in some way, shape, or form. I think we should be hearing from our people more than just the writ. But the writ was indicative that there may be a shift. I did see a shift in our averaging numbers, indicating that maybe we need to survey the whole, because people just don't have time to write to us about this stuff all the time and keep track of our stuff. We've got very long agendas and business stuff, because we're a big school, right? So I will be supporting this, but perhaps not for the same reasons beforehand, because I do believe we can find a better way of addressing what I wanted to address in that original motion that has not materialized despite those efforts. And I will say that, yes, I agree with Ms. Ellis in closing that I am disappointed that we cannot seem to, as a body, be supportive of what we actually pass in its full context and give things an actual chance. I think that is something that we could work on as a group to improve, because as it stands, I know the majority of my district will not feel represented by the process of our vote today. To have that fair opportunity to have the post-Labor Day calendar being presented in equal. And that is truly disappointing that their voice will be stymied today.
Okay, thank you. I think all the lights I see are old lights. Is there somebody? Oh, Ms. Frank, okay.
Yeah, I just had to circle back to just a comment or two, and I know Ms. Dent mentioned the length of the calendar and last year how far it went, but I did want to just bring up that we have had a significant positive change since then, which is now we can have our virtual snow day option, and that was the reason why, one of the reasons why the calendar went so late last year was because we had some inclement weather days and we ran out of our 3, so we went over, so that will have some remedy to be potentially addressed, so we may not run into that at this point. So some good news there for that. And then just as one closing statement, I couldn't find this earlier because I was the first one to jump on my light, but in our public comment, one comment that stood out to me was a parent who wrote in who specifically referenced our motion that we made and stated that they made their plans based on our motion and lamented that the board does this all the time, that they change their policy before they even allow it to happen, and that they wanted us to consider that before we vote. So I am absolutely considering that, and I wanted to present that to the board to please consider.
Okay, thank you. Oh, okay, Ms. Ellis.
Just real quick, because that made me think of something. I mean, we're less than a year out from next August, September. So it is conceivable that families have made vacation plans. And that is often a less expensive time to travel if you go last week of August. So that is problematic. I just wanted to point that out.
Okay, Ms. Shawn. Oh, okay. Well, as the motion maker, you get to say something if you wish.
This only rescinds a previous board action. It does not address our upcoming conversation about the next school year. So I think we should take each motion for what it is and how it's written and what it states. You have it in front of you. That's all I have to say about that. We should vote.
Okay, seeing no more lights, Ms. Howell.
Ms. Schulheim moved to rescind the board's action taken on January 20th, 2021, that for all future calendars, we evaluate the start date in the following manner. If Labor Day lands on September 5th or later, the school year would begin the preceding Monday. If Labor Day lands on or before September 4th, the school year would begin the day after Labor Day. Mr. McGrath.
Aye.
Mr. Silkworth.
Aye.
Ms. Frank.
No.
Ms. Ellis.
Nay.
Ms. Corkadell.
Aye.
Ms. Schulheim.
Aye.
Ms. Dent.
Aye.
Dr. Tobin.
Aye.
6-2, motion passes.
Okay, well, I was thinking perhaps at this point, we could take a preliminary, I guess the structure would be to make a motion to look at one and then the other.
No.
No? How do we do that then?
Can I suggest that, I don't know if there's a problem with this procedurally, but I believe there are motions that would apply to either calendar, and
Okay.
it could
All right,
impact the outcome ultimately.
okay, all right.
We could just vote and state which one we would rather, and then we can amend as appropriate if needed that one, and then we can move to.
Yeah, I guess that
The
was kind of
consistency
what I was
question.
getting at, sort of.
President Tobin, I'm looking out at our, maybe
We don't need to make this difficult, y'all.
No, I'm not,
I'm saying, are we okay?
I'm trying to have a fair process here,
Yeah,
so,
so we
and make
can-
it as clean as possible.
We
Yeah.
can establish that one is A and the other is B, and
Yeah.
we say which one, we go down the line, we say which one we would would prefer, and based on that outcome, we move forward.
Would that be, I'm
That would be
asking
fair.
if that would be reasonable as far as,
President Tobin, if I may make a suggestion, we just took a motion that that is irrespective of the calendars.
right.
I would
We did.
suggest that all amendments, any amendment that members have that are more based on regardless of the calendar.
Right. We
that
dispose of.
We dispose of all of them
Right.
first, and then
Okay.
proceed accordingly, because as we stand now,
Okay.
I just don't see why we wouldn't, or,
It could go
Okay.
either way,
but
actually.
it is definitely your call.
no,
but
I mean,
I would
I'm simply
suggest,
trying to give everything as
Based on
fair
what
a
I'm
hearing
hearing
as,
here next to me,
as fair a hearing as possible.
I think that would be a better approach, yeah.
Okay. So, I see Ms. Schulheim's light.
I'm ready to move whenever you want me to move, or proceed however you want to proceed. I'll leave my light on until my motions are displayed.
I have an amendment that I.
Okay.
introduced.
Let's go with the motions, and if they,
Well, in the absence of agreeing on any other process, I'll
Yeah.
just make my motion. I move that this board adopt a pre-Labor Day calendar for the 2023-2024 school year as recommended by the calendar committee. So
okay.
I'm looking on for a second.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Ms. Ellis, I see your light.
Yes. So my concern a couple minutes ago was I didn't feel it was appropriate for this board to adopt a calendar without knowing what it's fully going to look like when there's other amendments. But as I hear the motion, it is not adopting a calendar. It is the board agreeing to go with a pre-Labor Day start. And I'm comfortable with voting on that.
Okay. All right. Okay, so
But we don't have all of our members out, so
1, 2, do we have a quorum?
we do have.
Yeah, we have a
quorum.
quorum. Okay, I see, wait, I see Ms. Dent's light, but Ms. Dent is not here. Ms. Ellis?
I actually do have comments to the motion. I just wanted to
Okay.
ensure that we're all in the same
Go
place.
ahead, Ms. Ellis.
Okay, so again, as my reasons stated earlier, I struggle with this. But But I have issues with going late into June. I would like to see this board do better work in trying to condense our school calendar. And for that reason, I'm going to have things to say on a upcoming motion. But giving the options that are before us as far as where we're going to land, I am going to have to support, in this case, the pre-Labor Day start.
Okay, Ms. Corkada?
Well, as I indicated previously, and alluded to, I understand the late June, but I also, there is something to be said about, our duration of our summer, of our summer break, as well as substantially which month we are hanging out. We have kids in school. And those are two separate issues, I think. Because number one, we were in a required gubernatorial post-Labor Day environment. When that happened, that year that we had to adopt the post-Labor Day, our staff and our students got a little bit of extra time because we had previously been operating under a pre-Labor Day. So in that year, we did that. Everybody got a little bit of extra time. Likewise, when the board decided to go back to pre-Labor Day, naturally, those weeks got scrunched down. That's a one-time thing. We still are operating under the same amount of days and in the same way. So we're not adding or subtracting from someone's summer break by virtue of when it is starting, necessarily beyond a day or two in any given year, provided we actually have that stability and accountability that we're talking about doing. So I will not be for a pre-Labor Day, predominantly because that is what I know the majority, and not just majority, it's not just about majority, but the industries that need to survive up through Labor Day are those that are employing my students. They are the family business of my students, and we have labor shortages in the industries that these are in. We here in Annapolis are a tourism community, and so I do think that needs to play a role. And so I will not be for a pre-Labor Day, but I do agree we need to get that in line. And I think if we could formulate a version that didn't either put us in a disparaging way in August or in June, it seems to be one or the other, I would be for us starting maybe a couple days before Labor Day if we could find other resolves. But as it stands now, and the shape that we're in, I'm going to be a no on this. But I am supportive of some of the other initiatives I think that will be coming out of this, not just today, but also in the spring when we talk about the bigger picture of things.
Okay.
That's my comments.
Thank you. Ms. Dent? Sorry. Mr. Silkworth?
Thank you, President Tobin. So, I've spent a lot of time taking a look at both options. I've recently read, as I think many of us have, over 175 comments from stakeholders. And as I read those comments, I looked at that with an educational lens in terms of the reason for one or the other. So if I look at this calendar from an educational lens in terms of the benefits to our students, for me it's a no-brainer. Having been there, having done that. I've also talked with many of my colleagues, And so I will be in support of the pre-labor calendar. I also do support, I think we do need to make sure that our families can have some stability, and that's why I would support that whatever calendar we do approve, that could be used as a model for a second year, so we could have a second, a 2-year cycle, so that people will have the ability for stability. This does not mean that I don't have some questions concerning some of the issues raised by Ms. Corkadell, Ms. Ellis, in terms of what can we do in the future to help so that maybe we could at some point in time have a post-Labor Day calendar. And I think a lot of what is going to happen will depend upon our success with the 180-day issue that we are going to tackle, and I'm hoping we're going to have success with that, because that will allow for the innovation that we need, and it will be, again, in the best interest of our students and our staff.
Thank you. Ms. Ellis, did you put your light back on? No, it's just a reminder that I have. Oh, okay. Ms. Schalheim, I'll come to you at the end. I would just like to add a couple of comments. I second everything that Mr. Silkworth is saying from an academics perspective. Most teachers know instruction in June has pretty much no meaning. It's after exams. We have to be cognizant of when our students need their instruction most. I agree on consolidating the school year, and I agree with Mr. Silkworth that the 180-day thing is exactly what we need to address that. I should also say, however, with regard to the district I represent, I have families who sadly cannot afford an education, a vacation, let alone camps for their kids. The length going through Labor Day brings, the summer vacation going through Labor Day brings actually great hardship, and children, frankly, having nothing to do while their parents have to work. And so I just think there are many voices that we need to listen to here, and particularly with regard to the impact on our children and often, quite frankly, our most vulnerable children. And so for that reason, I will be in support of this. So, Ms. Schalheim.
Thank you. Yeah, for me, this isn't about Labor Day. This is about looking at our post-Labor Day calendar and looking at that last week that runs up almost against July and thinking, I don't want that. I don't think many people in this, I know most people in this county don't want that. We did put this out for public comment, and it wasn't close. It wasn't 50-50 even. With regards to this particular calendar year. Now, I'm not talking about, every year into the future, thou shalt, it must be one way or another. But for this upcoming year, when I look at these two options, it was clear for me. Now, from an educational perspective, because remember, this is an educational tool, an instructional tool, we have to think about our AP, our IB, our CTE certification tests, which ones of those are controlled by us, which ones of those aren't, and frankly, there are a lot that aren't. And then what are we saying? Are we saying that it's that we're okay with them having, a week or two or more less of instruction than their peers outside of this county or outside of this state? And so I look at this as, with the instructional lens, very much. And I look at that last week, and I look at all those weeks of school after Labor Day, if we did the post, and, just having a kiddo at home too, there's, it's sort of a waste at that point. So, yeah, I just look for your support on this. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no more lights. Ms. Howell?
Ms. Schalheim moved that this board adopt the pre-Labor Day calendar for the 2023-2024 school year as recommended by the calendar committee. Mr. McGrath.
Aye.
Mr. Silkworth.
Aye.
Ms. Frank.
Nay.
Ms. Ellis.
Aye.
Ms. Corkadell.
No, I'm gonna be a nay, but I have to question something. Ms. Ellis had asked for clarification that the motion was simply for pre-Labor Day and post-Labor Day. What you just read is the actual calendar itself. So could we get clarification on what we are voting on? Because I don't believe that perhaps at least one member was aware of that because of the answer provided to her. And what I just heard is not in alignment.
Could you read the motion again, Ms. Howell?
Ms. Schalheim moved that the board adopt the pre-Labor Day calendar for the 2023-2024 school year as recommended by the calendar committee.
I recommend that, as a point of order, that we reconsider our roll call vote. I know that's irregular, and I don't know what the exact chapter and article is on that Robert's rules, but we do have an opportunity if someone thought they were voting
have a
on
light
something
for this.
different.
Okay. I mean, we can amend. All right, Ms. Ellis?
Okay, so when this motion was made, I indicated that I was concerned. The reason I said the things I said before the motion was made was I did not think it was appropriate for this board to adopt a calendar without knowing what it was going to look like with the amendments that we knew were going to be brought. But I was comfortable, I said, moving forward with this motion because the way it was worded was a pre-Labor Day start.
Okay.
Or well, I wasn't corrected when I indicated that that's what I heard the motion to be. So that's how we proceeded.
No, I read it. I read it into the record. It was seconded. The motion is seconded appropriate. You talked about it ad nauseam.
Okay.
Ms. Schalheim, I indicated the reason I brought up the concern I had about adopting a calendar and the reason I was comfortable moving forward with this motion. If I misheard it, I should have been corrected in that moment. I indicated I was comfortable in moving forward with a start date for the school year next year. I am not comfortable moving forward with adopting a calendar. So I would change my vote, had I known.
If I could just, too, we were given advance notice, and I honestly think that the spirit and intent of us debating is really to allow everybody to be heard. Ms. Ellis made it perfectly clear that she had intended on an amendment, and that amendment would affect all of the dates on there. As I had stated prior to Ms. Ellis raising her initial concern was that I didn't understand why we wouldn't address the amendments that were relevant to both prior to. And when Ms. Schalheim had placed her motion, I would have, had Ms. Ellis not, requested the clarification based on that. And I did not hear the president, who is our presiding officer's decision on my original inquiry, nor on Ms. Ellis. And so now we're in a position where I still don't know where, we are now in limbo. So I would request that our presiding officer confer as needed and address
I will request
the
that
situation.
I will ask that we adjourn for a few minutes and we figure this out. hello again for another episode. Days of something. Anyway. Okay, I am going to ask Ms. Howell one more time to read the motion before us.
Ms. Schallheim moved that this board adopt a pre-Labor Day calendar for the 2023-2024 school year as recommended by the calendar committee. Mr. McGrath.
Well, I was going to
Sorry.
say, I do think there was a little confusion. I would like to start the roll call over. And so, Ms. Howell, please. Okay.
Now, I have an amendment to
Okay.
the motion.
Okay. I think we can do that. We have a motion and a second on the floor.
Change
We have an
as,
amendment. Okay.
change as to like, to prevent any confusion. So, like recommended by the calendar committee. The calendar committee recommended a calendar that starts pre-Labor Day,
Right.
and that is what many of us believe we are voting on right now, not the particular calendar that was brought before us.
Second.
Okay, so if the motion maker accepts, well, it was our motion, but can we take it as a tech edit, or do you think it's substantive enough that?
Darren says no.
Okay, so we need to vote. We need to vote on this amendment. Okay, so we have the amendment, and we had a second on the amendment,
Yeah.
right? Okay,
Let's vote on
so
that.
let's dispose of the amendment. Ms. Howell?
Does anyone need me to read it again?
No.
Okay. Mr. McGrath.
Aye.
Mr. Silkworth.
Nay.
Ms. Frank.
Aye.
Ms. Ellis.
Aye.
Ms. Corkadell.
On the amendment?
On the amendment.
Aye.
Ms. Schallheim.
Nay.
Ms. Dent.
Aye.
Dr. Tobin.
Aye.
6-2, motion passes.
Okay, so we have the amendment. So, Ms. Ellis, I see a light. Is that, okay. Okay, so I think we're ready to vote on the motion as amended.
Ms. Schallheim moved that this board adopt a pre-Labor Day calendar for the 2023-2024 school year, like recommended by the calendar committee. Mr. McGrath.
Aye.
Mr. Silkworth.
Aye.
Ms. Frank.
Nay.
Ms. Ellis.
Aye.
Ms. Corkadell.
Nay.
Ms. Schallheim.
Aye.
Ms. Dent.
Aye.
Dr. Tobin.
Aye.
Motion passes 6-2.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ellis?
I have an amendment for the proposed calendar. I'm sorry, I'm pulling it up. So the entire time I've been a board member, we've heard time and time again from families that there's a lot of disruption in the school year. And I mentioned a few minutes ago that I would like to see us be able to condense our calendar and find ways to condense it, but what often comes up is the number of early dismissal days. And I appreciate the work of the calendar committee in being able to remove a few of them in their recommended calendar. But my motion is, in order to maximize student learning by minimizing disruptions to the school day, and to reduce the practical and financial burden on families created by early student dismissals, I move that the proposed calendar be amended to remove the early dismissals on October 18th, December 6th, February 7th, and March 20th.
Second.
And I have a few words to say about it. If you look at the proposed calendar, and consistent with this year's calendar, these particular early dismissals are listed on the calendar as 2-hour early dismissal No afternoon ECI, Project Unity Day Professional Development. This is what they're listed as on the calendar. And we're very well, all very aware that there is professional development that goes on these 4 afternoons. And we're also very, very aware from many presentations here, including what was told to us today, that these 4 afternoons are focused on equity-focused professional development. My motion has nothing to do with professional development. It has to do with the school calendar and removing disruptions in the learning process for our students, which to me is a big equity issue. This motion does not eliminate professional development. Teachers professional development and the scheduling of it is in the superintendent's purview. I consider equity to be of utmost importance for our students, and I believe that this can enhance equity. I believe it was sometime last year, Mr. Silkworth and I sat down in a work group session with many, many teachers, some administrators, some other school staff, to work with them to see how we can improve their working conditions, because certainly COVID really piled on the work and brought us to a breaking point as far as workload issues for our staff. But workload concerns have not, they're not something new. They're not simply because of COVID. They still exist. And I firmly believe that any professional development would be much more effective, not in the middle of our quarters when teachers are teaching their students. They have enough on their plates. And I believe this motion will serve equity for our students.
Okay. All right, I think the next light was Ms. Schalheim.
Dr. Bedell, I would love to know your thoughts and feelings on this motion and its implications for our staff and students, teachers, staff, and students.
Ms. Schalheim, this is an interesting topic to talk about, and one that I'm up for having the discussion. I'll start off by saying to Ms. Ellis, I really do appreciate you, number one, for letting me know, and you didn't blindside me like I'm bringing this motion up. So I absolutely respect that. I think at the time when we talked about this, I said, hey, the implications of removing those days is something that I need to look into, simply because those are the days that are dedicated for us to do our equity work in this school district. And given the fact that I have seen the trainings where training was happening for the trainers, I haven't been into a school yet to actually see it in action. Right, which is part of what I was saying earlier. I'm also going off of secondary information on what these trainings are doing. We always want to make sure that any training that we do is a value add and that it's making us better as a school district. And I know that equity in this school district has been a priority for a number of years. I don't know if it was 7 or 8 years ago that this really did become a major focus, and it also is what led the board inclusion of these early dismissal days to ensure that we're able to make sure that we're doing this work. As a superintendent who has spoken on equity and is highlighted on many presentations, whether it's presenting to thousands of superintendents across the country, I value the work that needs to be done in this area, given the fact that we all have a responsibility to try to eliminate disparities that exist. And the thing that I must mention up here is equity work cannot just be something that is done in August. I don't even know how we find the time in August to do it. It has to be ongoing. The complaint that I have gotten over the years as a senior level administrator from teachers is you guys do these trainings at the very beginning of the school year, and then the complaint comes later, hey, then you just left it. You expect us to know how to do these things, and there's no revisiting of it. There's no building on it. The way that it's currently configured, it allows for us to also have relevant, real-time conversations around equity and some of the happenings that occur that we think could impact our students and our staff in real time. And so we want to make sure that what we're doing is focused, that it does focus on kindness, that it does focus on acceptance, that it does focus on inclusion, a conversation that I had to have with several parents last night around just making sure that people understand my understanding of what inclusion looks like in this school district. And I think those conversations went extremely well. But we want the conversations that I'm having with people, the way that we're having it, that I'm having it with people, we want that to also play out in how we're conducting our training. And so I just haven't had time to get in and evaluate it and to then be able, with some level of data, come back and say, hey, it's working or it's not working. And I think I'll have an opportunity to continue to evaluate that and to make sure that we do it. But here's the other piece that I have to say. We have a board policy. One of 3 priority recommendations on the Joint Commission on the Opportunity Gap, which is a partner with this board and the Anne Arundel County government, is establishing a practice within the Board of Education central office and the other participating political entities here, that we have a documented equity analysis to accompany all proposed policies and decisions. And we know that this can't be done properly and implemented if we're not able to do this professional development. It's very, and I've said this at this point, many of the days in August are already accounted for. So I don't know how we are able to get this in, not having those early dismissal days. But I think this is a bigger conversation around, as we think about the evolution of what our actual calendar looks like, that we need to explore. I too agree, Ms. Ellis, that these half days are tough. I have a middle schooler, and my wife is like, man, I feel like every other day she's got half days. So I agree with that. I 100% do. I just, at this point, it's difficult on me with the limited knowledge to say that, hey, we need to try to figure out how to move these days around without getting in and doing my due diligence. And I also think that this school district is one of the leaders in this work. Just a few years ago, the school district, one of 5, with populations of 20,000 or more, received the Magna Award from the National School Boards Association in recognition of innovative programs that are working to remove barriers to achievement for underserved and vulnerable students. And a lot of this is based on the work that we're doing. I had an opportunity to sit in a session on Thursday and watch our team present at a national conference on how they're working to adhere to the board policy and to talk about the different steps that we're taking to truly be as inclusive as we can possibly be of a school district. But I just want to do my part and be able to get in and see for myself. And like I said earlier, I invite any of the board members to go with me so we can see and we can come back and talk about the efficacy of what we're doing. Is it working or is it not working, and what can we do differently? But I think this year we've already removed 3 days, so we've gone from 15 to 12. So we are starting to cut back. I just think, for me, I need this next half of the year to really do my due diligence before I could, support it. But ultimately, it's up to the board. And here's what I will tell you all: whatever the decision is, we're ready to pivot. That's what I will say.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bedell. Ms. Schulheim, did you have additional comments?
Yeah, well, I just had an additional comment about that. You know, we just hired you. I do agree that I mean, I'm a parent too, with a kid in the system, so I get it, you know? But I can't support making this kind of change without you being able, without giving you some time to see what you even think about it, and to come back to us with some recommendations. So philosophically, I am in support of this, but today I can't vote in support of this, if that makes sense. I need to wait and hear back from you. Yes, the calendar's under the board's purview and PD's under yours, but I have to wait and see what you come back with, so we can hit all of what we need to hit in terms of equity. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe the next in line is Ms. Corkadell.
Thank you, President Tobin, and thank you for presiding over a calendar. It's a calendar agenda.
Why did I say yes?
Yes, I know. Really? You said yes again. All right. Well, now it's all on you.
Yeah.
For real. No, my fellow members have always been taking a look, trying to, and that's why I asked staff earlier on to please kind of go over this, because this is something that you struggle with, and you want to be responsive to your community and your community's needs, because they represent in part what our students' needs are. And I could probably pull up just as many emails that are prefer to have that from a staff perspective as whom do not. Ultimately, I see us going in a direction with the calendar recommendations that I hope we'll get a chance to adopt alongside here eventually with this calendar. That they recommended that we take our approach to the next level. And I'd like to see that happen, because as we stand right now, this is how we are set up. And this is how our parents are set up. I think it would benefit us to look at this in the multi-year realm as opposed to the contrary. Because I really think that I personally struggle, because I feel that it's our calendar, and we do receive advice from a committee. But the committee over the years, I do not know, has necessarily all of the stakeholders that we need to make the determinations, like Dr. Bedella had pointed out, and to make sure that we have that holistic. We should always be evaluating the profile of who is advising us. I think that's a regular, healthy course of any institution, especially one our size, is to make sure that are all those people being represented. That's 101 equity lens, and it used to be 101 common sense back when I was being educated. And so, not that is not an everyday effort of one's entire life, but I really do think that this is something better suited for that future point, and I do have a lot of admiration and gratitude towards my fellow member for investing the time and the efforts into it. I hope to be able to support this along with some other structural changes, and I look forward to doing that together as a team. I will be a no on this amendment, but I don't want the no being a no of or to hear 6 months from now, well, we already decided on that. I think we're deciding on it, and I want to go on record for this moment in time, for this particular calendar, as amended, not as a we made the decision, because that sometimes happens. So I will be a no today, but I look forward to supporting it alongside with some other, I think, changes that we can make definitely for the better. And I do appreciate the staff. I actually asked the question prior to our meeting that Ms. Schulheim had asked, and I do know it is available on the board site, and we were made aware of that earlier today. So thank you guys so very much, because I do think it's important that we hear from everyone
Thank
accordingly.
you. Ms. Frank?
Yes, thank you. I did just want to mention that we do see within the calendar committee's recommendations that they did add a suggestion for a PD day on November 1st, which I think is a great idea, and I do support that. I think that it was a really great way to kind of take feedback and put that into a place where it makes sense, and it's, parents would embrace that. I mean, even if they have to find childcare, at least they're like, well, it overall, it still helps the family dynamic, right? Because they're all going to be out late anyway. So there are certain areas where I do support professional development. We have gotten a lot of complaints about the half days, and I remember when we moved into adding the half days, I don't even remember exactly where all I landed on some of it, because I know that it was worth trying, and it's, as Dr. Bedell says, it's worth trying things, and if they don't work, you don't do them. We have gotten a lot of complaints about all of the half days. I'm glad that we got rid of some. I do want to get rid of more. We had a couple of comments in some of the other motions earlier about the educational and the instructional lens, but I'm not an educator. I'm a parent, and I ran for this board as a parent to represent people in my community, and what parents want is more stability in their calendar, and especially with the direction that we are going today, I am going to fight for that stability, so I will be a no on this motion.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Dent?
Yeah, I was like,
I meant yes on the motion. I'm sorry. It's a long day.
It's been a long day, folks. Okay, Ms. Dent?
So the calendar for me has always been probably the most interesting and intriguing thing that I've ever done on this board.
Those
I
are some
say that
interesting words.
It
for this.
is because I am a driven person by this little thing called a calendar. Everybody wants you to stick to it. We plan our life around it, right? And parents, rightfully so, plan their work schedule around it. What I find myself kind of conflicted with is two things. So 8 hours of professional development for the superintendent to train his staff on things that are important he's been directed to make sure that they are trained on. And equity is one of them. So the professional development lens, if you just stick with professional development, has got to be done. Now, he was kind enough to say he'll get it done, as he's put in his email, but the question is, if I am right, they should be done during the duty hour when the educator is there, not after hours, not on some spare time, not a made-up. It should be part of the schedule, and the schedule is public. So that's one. The second one is that the 8 hours that is specifically laid out targets the days that we're doing professional development for equity. That becomes problematic when there are 2-hour early dismissals almost every month in every calendar. So what I disagree with is the targeted of the dates. I think that if we are being fair, and not just because Dr. Bedell is the superintendent, but because of professional development, it can't be we can't have an institution without professional development. And professional development should be and must be baked into the calendar continuously. If we don't like the content of the professional development, then let's address that, and let's not sleep, or use in other words, let's not pretend that that's not what we're talking about. If we really truly want to not interrupt the day of the 2 hours dismissal, then we give that back to the calendar committee to reevaluate the calendar so that there's not so many early dismissal days. I think that is a different point altogether. What I'm really getting frustrated about is we can't keep on using the word an equity lens, and then everything about equity becomes problematic. So what is it that we want to do with equity? If we don't want it on the calendar, then say that. I'm just getting frustrated with the fact that we target equity at all times. I do know that equity is important to everyone that's sitting on this board. I do know that equity is important to this entire staff. What I don't know is where do we put equity at on our list of things to do when it comes to the calendar. I don't know where we're putting that at. And so what I'm suggesting, rather than go down this road of, are we talking about equity? Or are we talking about professional development? Or are we talking about not disrupting the student's day? That we define that thing that we're really talking about. And I don't think that we've done that just far. Because it's not fair to go back to the calendar committee and say, we're just going to remove those days. Because the next step is, what do we put to professional development? Because there's a domino effect to every decision that we make. So I'm asking that we be transparent about what is it that we want, the directions that we want to go, and then where do we put these other things? Because I think it's unfair to vote on a motion that doesn't give the outcome, that doesn't get the outcome that we're looking for, because we're going to put it somewhere else. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Dent. Ms. Schalheim.
I just had a question. When were the 4 Unity early dismissal days established, if you don't mind? What year, do you know?
They were,
Well before I was on the
did
board.
some research on that. Let me find it.
And I don't need to know that right now. I
Nope.
just was curious.
The 2011-2012 school year, they were put in as, they were called Attacking the Gap days then.
Got
We're
it.
talking about achievement gaps and
Got
equity
it.
work, but that's when they were put in.
So all of those days were put in well before any of us were on the board. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to say a couple of things, and then Ms. Ellis, you will have the final word. So a couple of thoughts. I believe that we need to give Dr. Bedell the opportunity to make a considered decision on this. We hired him because we trusted his ability to lead the system. I think we should let him make that decision. And because, to Ms. Dent's point, it's not just taking something out, it's where do you put it back? And, you know, doing that right now, he's not in a good position, I think, as he has stated, to make that decision. I have no doubt he would pivot if he had to. I know he will, but I don't think that's a wise decision for this system and for us to ask of the superintendent we've just hired. I also want to say a word about professional development in general. Some of you know that as part of my day job, I lead accreditation teams evaluating public charter networks around the country, and I have for a decade or so. The ability to have good professional development, and as Dr. Bedell has said, have it not simply as a, you know, fire hose at the beginning of the year or something, but really woven into the year, is often one of the defining factors in the excellence of a school system. And this is for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's pretty obvious. You're continually refining the practice of your teachers. But secondly of all, it's a huge recruitment tool when you do it well. I know plenty of teachers who have moved from one system to another largely on the basis of whether or not they believe they are working in a system that is growing them as practitioners. And so while from a parental perspective, and I certainly have been a parent in this system, PD is a little bit opaque as sort of a thing on the calendar that says my kid has to be somewhere else today, they can't be in school. From the perspective of educators and ultimately of our children, it is profoundly important, and it cannot be and should not be simply an added thing that we squeeze in when we've taken care of every other need. It has to be fully intertwined in what we do. I trust Dr. Bedell to determine how best to do that, as he said, to determine whether or not this is a value add. And if it isn't, how do we make it so? If it is, great. And so I will not be in support of this motion. However, I do believe, I said this before, there are problems with early dismissals. I believe the discussion we had previously about our legislative priorities begins to get at one of the core things that's getting in our way. And finally, I will say, here's the danger, the biggest danger, in my view, of the rigidity of our calendar broadly with regard to the constraints around things like how many days. Our students are far from dumb. They know when they're sitting in school just because somebody said so on a rule book versus when they're there because they need to be there. And the biggest danger we face, I believe, as educators, is having children twig at some point that most of this is somehow busy work, because then you lose them. So I'm all for an authentically determined calendar. I think that has to come from Dr. Bedell's analysis. I think Dr. Bedell has heard us loud and clear. I congratulate the calendar committee on reducing the number of half-days thus far. I hope this trend will continue with their efforts and with our legislative efforts. And so those are my thoughts on this. Ms. Ellis.
Thank you. I'm going to start out by saying my colleague, who I truly love dearly, I feel question my motivation here, implying that I don't like the content of the PD, so I'm trying to eliminate them, saying pretend we're not talking about the content of the PD when we are. I made the point out the gate that this is not about the content of the PD, and I contend that these early dismissals create an equity issue. I proposed alternatives to when and how this PD can occur. I've also, Dr. Bedell, I completely understand and respect your position. I don't think I would expect you to have any other opinion than you do right now, because you are assessing, and I know you are very you're very astute to it. Like I can see that you can look at a situation pretty quickly, pick up on, where the issues are. So I have every faith in that, and I appreciate that. But you did characterize this as the days to do our equity work. And in my opinion, this should not be our equity work. It should be a very small piece of it. I've said it before on this dais long before Dr. Bedell got here, that it troubles me that we were putting so much faith into a few afternoons as our solution to equity concerns. Look at our test scores. You can see where the gaps are. This work should be happening in department meetings regularly. This should be about educational practices. Look, I hate that I'm sitting here talking about PD, because I'm talking about our school calendar. I'm talking about 4 afternoons that I believe firmly, because I believe what our families tell us, create a hardship on them. So while I fully appreciate that Dr. Bedell needs time to really have a firm opinion and a recommendation for this board, today is the day we're adopting our calendar. And I've been in the seat for 4 years, and I know that this is good for our students to have less disruption. Dr. Bedell mentioned kindness, acceptance, and inclusion. These should be expected at all times and should not require extensive training to treat others as we want to be treated. That should be a daily expectation, and we shouldn't accept any less. I noted that almost everyone in this discussion referred to them as half days. 2-hour early dismissals are less than a third of the day. But let's face it, they are extremely disruptive. They are not considered, psychologically, certainly in the student's mind, a day for learning. And finally, while I appreciate board members turning to our superintendent for his recommendation, the calendar again is the board's decision, and there should be PD happening throughout the school year. I think the time to dive deep into these topics is before the students are in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Ms. Dent, is that your previous slide? Okay.
No, it's not. Ms. Ellis, I just want to be clear that it is not my intent to think that you are targeting professional development. It is the fact that the dates that are called out are the professional development days for equity. So my concern is that your objective at the conversation was to get rid of some of the early dismissal days to avoid the disruption. However, when you start calling out the calendar specific dates, those dates address equity, which is why everybody's talking about equity on this dais. So my point is not to single you out. My point is that the conversation came up about equity only because everyone knows that those are the equity days. So in fact, when you add that to the motion, that is the piece that derails the conversation and starts the conversation down this path. If we are just talking about getting rid of early dismissal, as I told you before, I support that. What I am concerned about and remain concerned about is the dates that's in the motion, which is what concerns me, because those dates target professional development that is toward equity, which means they have to be baked somewhere else. So it is not to imply, as I well know that you more than care about equity. It is simply to say that those dates does target that. That's where I was going with that. The second part of that is that we do this every time. If what directions is gets rid of early dismissal days to where we want to change it from 8 days to 4 days, I'm simply suggesting that we give that to the calendar committee prior, not after. And then the last thing is we have to have professional development. And so whether we do it during these early dismissal days or when, it has to be baked into the calendar. So not to single you out or any person out about their agendas. It is simply to say that from a calendar perspective, there's 3 distinctive things, but it's one singular motion that it addresses. That's simply all I was addressing.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dent. Ms. Frank?
Just a brief question to anybody who wants to answer. I was my understanding that the other, I believe it is 8 days, is that correct, Mr. Mosher, were required by our contracts. Is that
So I can't speak to the contract. They are 2 early dismissal days at the end of each of the 4 marking periods.
And then that totals the 8.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah, okay,
I would
okay,
need to
yeah.
confer with Ms. Rawls about what the exact language in that contract was. I would not be comfortable sitting here saying that
Okay.
there are 2 required at each of those marking periods.
Okay. I'm under the
I'm happy to get that
impression-
answer
yeah,
to you.
I'm under the impression that those are not something that we can tweak. And I'm happy to be corrected, but I believe that that's where we are. And just as another aside, I've had comments, and I do want to bring this particular comment because I think it's relevant. They're on a Wednesday, which are some of the hardest days to get. And so if we ever go back to the drawing board on this again, maybe we could at least look at moving the day to a Friday or something. And I think that you had said that at one point, but maybe we could bring that back up and
So it's a
rehash
conversation
Yeah.
at the calendar committee.
Yep.
Every year we talk about early dismissals. Here's the fact. Teachers don't attend PD on Friday afternoons.
Is that a choice?
I mean, it's just really that simple.
Okay. Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, I believe I see no more lights.
I'm sorry, but as the
Ms.
motion
Ellis?
maker.
Yes.
Real quick, so Ms. Dent pointed out a good point that if I had addressed the other days up front, it would completely explain my line of thinking, which is that we can't touch, and I don't care if it's, whether it's contractual or not, teachers need time. They need time to transition between quarters. I don't consider those as something we can touch. That only leaves 4 other days, 4 other early dismissal days in the calendar. It has nothing to do with the content of PD. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ellis. All right, I believe there are no more lights. Ms. Howell?
Ms. Ellis moved that the proposed calendar be amended to remove early dismissals on October 18th, December 6th, February 7th, and March 20th. Mr. McGrath.
Nay.
Mr. Silkworth.
Nay.
Ms. Frank.
Aye.
Ms. Ellis.
Aye.
Ms. Corkadell.
Nay.
Ms. Schalheim.
Nay.
Ms. Dent.
Nay.
Dr. Tobin.
Nay.
2-6, motion fails.
Thank you. Ms. Schalheim?
So I have a question for you, Madam President. Because we changed the wording of the motion do we have to go back and formally approve? Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do. All right, so I'm gonna read the motion that I move that this board adopt the pre-Labor Day calendar for the 2023-2024 school year as recommended by the calendar committee.
Second.
And hopefully we've been round this enough.
Okay, Ms. Ellis?
I just want to be thoroughly clear that there were multiple recommendations made by the calendar committee that are not just this calendar. I hear the motion to read that the motion involves simply this calendar. Correct. I want to make sure
The
there's
2023-2024 calendar
right.
as recommended by the calendar committee.
Making absolutely clear. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Corkadell?
So I presume our member will be presenting her other motion as it relates to the nature of what we're going to do moving forward.
Correct,
Eh, eh,
once we eventually get
Yeah.
through this.
Because I was going to suggest we separate if not, because we need that
done that already.
agility, because who knows what our legislature's going to do.
That
We
is
always
next, let's
always get
dispose of this
surprises.
first.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so my position will be remaining as such, and I will be supporting the remainder of it and have no further comments to make. I've already stated my position.
Okay, I don't see any lights. Ms. Schalheim, do you want to make some?
I don't, I want to vote,
Okay.
in case I haven't made that clear. It's time for voting. It's almost 4.
Ms. Howell?
Sorry, can you read back your motion, please?
All right. One more time, just for good measure. I move that this board adopt the pre-Labor Day calendar for the 2023-2024 school year as recommended by the calendar committee.
I second.
That was clear.
Mr. McGrath,
Aye.
Mr. Silkworth,
Aye.
Ms. Frank,
Nay.
Ms. Ellis,
Aye.
Ms. Corkadell,
Nay.
Ms. Schalheim,
Aye.
Dr. Tobin. I'm sorry, Ms. Dent.
It was nay anyway.
Yeah.
No, it's me. It's aye.
Dr. Tobin.
Aye.
Motion passes 6-2.
Okay.
Ms. Shaw?
All right. Let's be brief, shall we? All right. I move that the board begin the school year calendar adoption process 2 years in advance, utilizing a consistent committee-based process for building calendars with a holistic view of the school system's needs each year and in accordance with policy IB.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Okay, Ms. Ellis?
I support the need for consistency. I don't think we're in a place yet where we can do this because it's already in our legislative program that we may be adopting at our next meeting to seek some flexibility in our calendar from the state. So we don't know enough about what that's going to look like and what we'll be able to work with. So I feel like right now we're working on a year-by-year basis until we hopefully get to a place where we want to be. In the future, I support consistency, as I've stated every year, in the development of our calendar. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Corkadell?
So I will be supporting this motion. We've talked about this, and I got to say, as a parent who's lived under multi-year and under year by year, I am always in preference of the multi-year, recognizing, I mean, we're adjusting whether we're year by year or multi-year anyways, for a whole host of reasons that come up. I mean, who would have thought that all of a sudden an executive order would come up, that led us to have to change our June profile of our calendar following a post-Labor Day executive order. And so having that agility, of course, I don't see it diminishing. I would like to ask, though, in the past, and this is where, welcome Dr. Bedell, so to speak, I'm not really sure how you feel about things as such, as I had indicated in our earlier conversation and deliberation on these matters, that I think our survey of and to be clear, the last time I think the survey was pretty straightforward, was pre-Labor Day, post-Labor Day, and maybe we added one or two more other questions, but it was pretty straightforward and simple. I'm wondering if I need to make a motion, or if this is something we can just here and now kind of agree to move forward with, because I have been under the impression we were moving forward in the past and then it not materialized. So that's why I'm asking, is there an interest or a way we could develop a survey that could address some of these 2-hour early dismissals versus a 2-hour start later, which is some of the suggestions I've been hearing from people. And, our calendar committee is always placed at a disadvantage, of course, because I feel like we're almost hearing from a percentage of the people in the postscript, and they are reacting to the recommendation, when usually that should be interactive from, as we materialize. And so I'm going to be voting yes on this motion, but this would also be the place where we would ask for additional data that goes beyond what was already presented. And from what I heard in all of the amendment deliberations is that we are making suppositions, and we're making them based on limited feedback at a less than 1 percentile ratio, and we have gained great value and usually receive a strong, robust feedback from our surveys. And so I understand these are also tiresome endeavors as it relates to staff intensity and then ensuring we get the feedback and then the follow-up. So I would ask if there's an interest here and how you feel about us maybe asking, or right now it's just me asking, of course, but that there is value enough in there for, and then how would you prefer to proceed if you concur or in part or with that idea?
Yeah, for me, given the presentation we presented to you all earlier on one of the legislative agenda items that we're going after, that I think there's some promise there that probably could pass, would absolutely warrant us having to engage our community around the many different types of options that we could explore. And I would probably say it would be a better time to do that once we know for certain that we now have that tool in the toolbox.
And I would also argue that likewise, if it takes more than one session to get that adopted, which sometimes it unfortunately does, that we would be, by still following through with such a survey and collection of data and community engagement as appropriate, that we would also strengthen our position for subsequent years if the GSA was hesitating a little bit on that. So it sounds like we're okay with it. I would just ask what the president's opinion is, because it's not a place of any one member to impose such a project. But I would like it, because this is kind of part of the motion of how we're going to proceed with this multi-year calendar.
So my immediate sense is that this is something that we simply need to have further conversation with Dr. Bedell about. I mean, everything I've seen from Dr. Bedell, I think all of us have seen, is he is very committed to getting public input in every possible way. And so I would again suggest that, Dr. Bedell, you've heard the concerns today, and I will follow up with Dr. Bedell, because I think that's the real question. Does this get lost, or does it sort
Correct. I've had many of my things get lost.
Yes, so I'm happy to follow up with Dr. Bedell as we move forward and report back, if that's acceptable to the member, of sort of where people are.
Okay, no, I'm fine with that. I just didn't want to miss an opportunity there if we needed to do any instruct. Thank you so very much for taking an extra couple minutes to address that. I think in the long run that is time well invested in us making it perfectly clear to our constituency that we have an interest in wanting to work with them, not just hear from them in moments of time. So thank you very much for both of your responses.
Thank you. Ms. Frank?
Yes, so I just, to the motion maker, I wanted some clarity on this. I move that the board begin the school calendar adoption process 2 years in advance, but there's no definitive date on it. So, I mean, I do want to commit to some stability. I keep saying that. I honestly do. And I do want a 2-year calendar. I think that that's needed, and I think that would really help a lot of folks in managing their lives with the calendar that we would give in advance. I do want to wait to develop the next year's calendar until we or the subsequent calendar until we understand what the legislative body brings back to us. But the way that I am reading this, those two things could still be accomplished because this does not have a start date. So if we say, hey,
Correct.
we're not there yet, we're not ready to start the 2-year calendar, we can still pause that, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, then I do support this motion.
It doesn't put limitations on it. We just sort of declare our intent that, I mean, we're already late on that anyway because
Yeah.
we're doing, but that, next year we'll have 2 before us, we hope. we could have the second year out one later this coming year in the spring, for example. It just gives us, now we have a place to start from, and you know, it begins that process.
Okay, and
It
then so
doesn't
if
assign any
we get
timeline
the
to it.
legislation passed that we hope to see, I would fully support incorporating that. If we don't, I would say at that time, I wouldn't be ready to follow through with a second calendar.
It
at the same
doesn't
time.
preclude
So,
further
yep. So I
action of
just
the
want to
board.
throw that out that
Mr.
Not to lock ourselves into a two-year calendar.
until we get to that point. Yeah.
Mr. Mosher,
So I just have, on a day that's probably been confusing for folks who are watching, just to try to eliminate any confusion, let me just ask it this way. Should the board pass this motion, my understanding is, it does not launch the 2-year calendar creation process. Is that correct?
That's not how I read it.
It would launch the 2-year.
So this is why I asked the question.
yeah.
So could we begin following the conclusion of this year's General Assembly? Or some sort of I mean, there's no date on it, so there's no start date. So to me, it wouldn't necessarily launch at the
That's
conclusion
exactly
of
why I
this meeting.
asked.
So I appreciate that comment.
Well, I actually had I had a question to your question. Let's say the Maryland General Assembly does what we're hoping it will, and take away the and put in the or. Would we even be in a position at that moment to pivot that hard to produce a brand new calendar with that in mind?
We would be in a position to begin that.
Begin, yeah.
Because it will be a process.
Your
She's absolutely right.
Mike,
Your mic's not.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you will begin the process. So we already have that ability now to start moving forward with the process of engaging, because this is a fundamental change potentially in the mindset of what a school calendar could look like, and that is going to require a lot of engagement. So it's not one of those deals like as soon as the bill passes, now overnight we're going to, be able to pivot to these other calendar options. There's significant engagement that will have to take place. So yeah.
Mr. Shalheim, if I could, so to add to Dr. Bedell's comments, you would be so to pivot, you would be looking at the 24-25 calendar anyway, because the General Assembly is not going to adjourn until April.
Right.
And the effective date of that legislation is not going to be until at some point after that.
yes. Yeah, so, I mean, the motion doesn't lock us into any sort of timeline. But I think that if we're all in agreement that we would rather see this ideally as a 2-year out sort of thing for planning purposes and whatever, if it takes us quite some time to then develop the ideal calendar based on your recommendations, based on calendar committee, for what that would look like in a post hours and days, driven world, then maybe it's sort of a moot point for that calendar 2 years out at that point. Maybe it would still be status quo since it would take that time. I mean, it would be nothing shy of a miracle to get something through in one session, though I hope it will.
But that's true.
But it happens. So I don't think the motion locks us into any particular time frame or deadline or period of any kind. There's nothing listed in the motion that would indicate this such.
Ms. Ellis, you're next.
I would need a legal reading on that, because I read it as, I move that the board begin the school year calendar adoption process 2 years in advance, telling me that as soon as this motion passes, we got to get working on 24-25 because we're late.
It went through legal.
Okay, well, I have not
Well,
heard
what the
a legal opinion on
implications of
this.
it are
Yes.
is the question.
Correct.
Right?
I'm not ready to work on the 24-25 calendar prior to the spring.
I believe
Okay.
legal is entering the room.
No,
Or is that someone?
no.
Mr. Burns has asked if you can take a recess,
Okay.
and he can come and speak with you.
So do we have to close to do that?
Close for
Because
legal.
if the whole board is going to confer with him,
Yes.
so we need a closed motion.
I move to enter into closed session to receive legal advice.
Second.
Do we have consensus? Yeah. All right. Are we ready
Let's vote.
to vote on said motion? Okay. Ms. Howell, would you
I just want to vote.
yeah.
Ms. Schalheim moved that the board begin the calendar, I'm sorry, let me restart. Ms. Schalheim moved that the board begin the school year calendar adoption process 2 years in advance, utilizing a consistent committee-based process for building calendars with a holistic view of the school system's needs each year and in accordance with policy IB. Mr. McGrath.
Aye.
Mr. Silkworth.
Aye.
Ms. Frank.
Aye.
Ms. Ellis.
Aye.
Ms. Corkadell.
Aye.
Ms. Schalheim.
Aye.
Ms. Dent.
Aye.
Dr. Tobin.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Okay. I see no more lights. Are we done with the calendar?
Let's hope so.
I believe we're done with the calendar. Okay.